Hey, welcome back, Talent Warriors. This is episode 2 of the Talent War podcast with your host, George Randle, and Mr. Tom Lokar, PhD in all things talent. Hopefully you got to listen to episode 1 and realize why we're doing this podcast. Is that the most critical issue going on in any company at any time is the war for talent and that HR ecosystem. You know, we talked about so many people seeing HR as an afterthought or overhead, and we started to lay the groundwork for HR really being a strategic function, being the critical part of the business ecosystem that drives everything else in your company. And we gave you a little bit of background about Tom and I, and so we're on to episode 2. Hopefully make it a little bit less meandering, but I wanted to welcome back Tom Lokar and ask today's question. Tom, what do you think the biggest challenge that HR faces today?
Well, thank you, George, and thank you, Talent Warriors, for joining us again. You know, the pat answer, George, if I was to go right into it, the pat answer is, finding the right leaders for the right scale of your business, where your business is in its life cycle, and creating that culture that fits the growth of your company, the ethos of your company. But we have to talk, as we said in our first podcast, real with our audience. And the biggest challenge facing HR right now is finding talent at every level, finding people that want to work. And this isn't just coming from my head of HR role with a hospital system through the Southeast that operates in a lot of rural areas. But I was on vacation this weekend with my wife and just got talking to some folks around the pool, and a couple of CEOs also getting away with their wives, one on anniversary and one just getting away. And we got talking about, they have manufacturing businesses, the others in software, and they operate in some parts of their business are global. But we were talking just domestically, how hard it is to find people and how hard it is to develop the compensation package that attracts people back into the workforce. And we went through all of the things that you're hearing in maybe not all media, but certainly business media, that unemployment benefits, stimulus. I don't think it's we don't think it's necessarily a fear of going back to work because of COVID, but people have an ability, certainly if you're looking for a non-exempt employee, they have the ability to live their life, make their car payments, get food on the table, keep the roof over their head through those benefits. And they're weighing that check coming in and other things they want to do in their life. And, in my world, coming to make $12 to $13 an hour in a psych hospital for a 12-hour shift.
It's just not all that appealing at that rate.
Yeah, or working on a manufacturing floor. I was really surprised. The one guy was talking about his businesses in rural Kentucky and Tennessee, the Appalachia corridor, where there's been incredible years of poverty and poor education and an explosion of opiate abuse and meth abuse. And you would think if you showed up there with a really strong hourly wage that everybody would want to come and work. But he has to put really what he sees as excessive compensation together to attract people, probably because, and this goes to the HR challenge for any company right now. This is just my observation. I could be wrong. There's probably economists and other smart people that will listen to this later on and say, I didn't know what I was talking about. But the normal distribution of performance and quality labor in the country, let's take that bell curve and say there's a midpoint, there's a 25th percentile, there's a 75th percentile. There's this range of performance, and we're all trying to select and pay toward the midpoint that we believe we need to make our companies function. For companies that are hiring at the hourly level, the non-exempt level, you've got a much wider range of education, socioeconomic sophistication, and frankly, that labor pool's need to work is different than your traditional salary exempt employee.
Yeah, there was a statistic that came out, and I think it was with some of the benefits, that there was one state that it amounted to $21 an hour not to work.
Yeah.
How the hell did we get that so ass backwards?
I don't know. I just saw on Fox Business that a McDonald's, I don't know if it's all McDonald's, but a McDonald's is giving away iPhones to any new hire who stays past 6 months.
Wow. And I really thought, Tom, that's crazy. I'm glad that you brought this up because I thought, when you, me, Mike, Carly, when the Talent War Group team, we're out there searching for top talent. I mean, it's a war for those top leaders, those movers, those shakers, those people that are going to change the financial product and service trajectory of a company. And I really did go into this podcast thinking that would be, one of the first things we talked about. I didn't realize that as we launched this podcast, we're actually having to talk about how HR leaders can navigate finding people, their incentive to work is now disappearing.
Yep. And it's not unimportant work. Like, we don't have these jobs, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, Amazon, Oceans, this manufacturing company. We don't have these hourly jobs because they're unimportant. They're core. I mean, if you take the pyramid of your organization, you've got more people at that level than at the top level. So you need good people. And so you've shrunk that labor pool. And now if you're in a rural area or a certain part of a city, the city's grown and traffic's terrible and people don't want to commute as far, you're starting to select a narrower swath of your labor pool. And now you've got to figure out, am I pulling from the 25th percentile and having to pay 50th percentile wages? Or am I somehow luckily tapping in the 75th percentile and maybe I'm paying 60 to 75th, but I know I'm getting good people? That's the thing. I'll be very honest, because it's been a while since I've been so close to a business where the hourly wage earner is so important to the delivery of services in our particular company, trying to figure out how I can find that higher end of the talent pool and pay appropriately so we don't break our business model because, like any company, there's only so much salary we can afford in our budget, and there's only so many patients we can have in our hospital at one time. That's driven by the size of the hospital, and then we have a ratio of direct care delivery to those filled beds. And so we have to stay within an envelope to stay profitable. This is not just because we're doing behavioral health. This is not a for-profit. It's a for-profit, privately held, PE-held company. So that, to me, right now, the here and now, is the biggest challenge.
It's got to be driving people nuts. And, as an HR leader, I think that's one of the things we talked about on the previous podcast that people don't get is the complexity of the leadership dynamic amongst HR professionals that you and I, that we've been swimming around and working with over the years is people just don't get how complex of an environment. Who would have thought that we would come out of the pandemic or, really be rushing out of the pandemic, and now you can't find labor. And what's even worse is I remember a long time ago, somebody had made that joke about working at McDonald's. And there was the exec, and I can't remember the person's name, but told me, if you look at all the CEOs in the world, one of the things that most of them have in common is they spent time working at McDonald's or fast food, that it created the work ethic, the drive to rise to the top of the corporate ladder. McDonald's is such a one of many. Chick-fil-A, there's all kinds of restaurants like that just lay the groundwork for the discipline, the work ethic, the integrity, the quality, that set you up for such success down the road. And now we're providing incentives for people not to work there. Ridiculous.
So the next challenge then is when you can find that talent, the next challenge facing HR is retention. And it's one of the things we're working on very hard is to flip the script because we're always focused on turnover, which is, the obverse of retention, but I think it sets a tone of negativity around your challenge. Instead of the challenge of reducing turnover, let's increase retention. Let's come at this from a holistic standpoint of who are we selecting? How are we selecting them? What questions are we asking them to determine whether they're ready to stand in a hot kitchen or to work on a manufacturing floor or hospital? Try to gauge their level of vocation to the role, and then have really fantastic targeted cultural onboarding and orientation, as well as job-specific orientation, mentoring, pairing them up with an employee who's been there a longer period and can navigate that first shift, those first few hours, I remember my son, Hugh, who's now a shift manager at Chick-fil-A at age 17, so maybe he's a future CEO, George. I'll have to tell him that. I remember his first week, the things that he had to get used to customers saying who weren't getting what they wanted. And he started in the middle of the pandemic, right? So there's no dining inside. It's all delivery in the hot sun, here in the hot Texas sun, on a 9-hour shift. People can't get to they didn't have the carryout window set up yet. The stuff that he had to just deal with, same with my son who works at Starbucks for the past 2 years, the stuff that they've had to deal with, the stuff they hear from people, it's abusive. And so helping them navigate through that is part of the retention process, because you don't want to have to go back into this labor pool. The chances that you'll find someone as good as I think my sons have been in their jobs is unlikely. So that's the next challenge facing head of HR. And, there's more complicated challenges for the bigger companies. If you're a Google or a Facebook and you're dealing with a current workforce that is starting to polarize and or push your culture in ways it wants to go versus the way you as a company want to go to support your business. Those, I think, are huge challenges if you're the head of HR at Google and Facebook. But for the everyday warrior in the HR trenches, I think it's this narrowing labor pool.
And I'm going to take that up just a little bit of a level. This is one of those complexities when people make the mistake of looking at human resources and just turning the cranks on the comp and benefits. We've talked about the blocking and the tackling and how important it is. But this is where being a strategic HR leader counts the most. Because, your CEOs, your chief revenue officers, chief product officers, your entire C-suite, they're not going to be, they're going to be feeling these challenges, but it's up to that HR leader to solve for these challenges, to go, okay, we're coming out of a pandemic. What issues are going to face us? What are we seeing? How is, the incentives to not work affect us? How does the now working remote and people being portable, to me, it's not a pleasant problem to have, but I think it's one of those problems that demonstrates very clearly why being a strategic HR leader and getting ahead of your human capital problems is absolutely so crucial. And, we talked about this the very first time, and we put it in our book. The CHROs are generally paid a third less than their C-suite counterparts. And right now, you've just brought to the table the issue that can bring companies to a grinding halt. And you're paying the person who's going to solve those problems or bring solutions to the table. As we say, bring human capital solutions to business problems. You're paying that person a third less. This is a very, very tough job for people that are in the trenches right now. Very tough. And with no easy answers.
Well, and just 12 months ago, if you had asked me this question, I would have said dealing with COVID was the biggest HR challenge, and figuring out where your workforce should be, what safety protocols should you put in place. And looking back, not being a sitting CHRO at the time, while I was doing some contract work as a head of HR and working with an executive team on those challenges as well as others, looking back, we were dealing with incomplete data, an incomplete picture. And so some of the things we did probably were unnecessary, probably overreactions, as we've learned more and more about how the disease works and how it can be transmitted and how we can defend against that transmission. And now we are, almost 50% inoculated or more. Some states are 70%, but the country coming up to 50%. By Memorial Day, from a pandemic standpoint, COVID isn't gone, but the pandemic is essentially gone. And so I don't think heads of HR are now sitting there challenged with, how do I deal with the pandemic? Yes, they're trying to figure out, okay, when can we bring down our mask mandate? When do we start pivoting people back into the office because we believe there's value in having people face-to-face and having that lunch break discussion or a drive-by discussion where work gets done in between the seams of the meetings. Those are challenges I think they're facing post-pandemic, but they're not facing the COVID issue. It's now all going and pivoting back to workforce, culture, labor, and that ultimately becomes a leadership challenge, George. So I'm going to rise up with you and say the biggest challenge facing HR is at the micro level. If you're struggling with figuring out where to get the best people to fill your most fundamental jobs, The team that has the best leadership will figure that out faster than the team that doesn't.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot, Tom. Do you think with the pandemic, the issues of working remote, the issues of businesses also, now with that, a lot of companies had to cut back because their services just weren't going to be used or were needed. Do you think that the pandemic, do you believe that coming out of the pandemic has in any way elevated the status, the importance, or the criticality of the HR being a true strategic leader for a company? Or do you think we're still stuck in the same rut where they're going to go, well, just go figure this shit out?
No, I mean, someone smarter than me, a couple people smarter than me wrote, this particular crisis is the era of the CHRO. 2009 was the era of the CFO.
Hey, that's a really good way to put that. I almost want you to repeat it.
Someone smarter than me wrote this probably a year ago. I think, in fact, I know I read it in a Korn Ferry article around the August timeframe when we were seeing, we had racial tensions rising due to the George Floyd situation. We had the pandemic going up and down, right? We thought we were through it. End of the summer, it started coming back up in certain states that it hadn't hit hard yet. The Korn Ferry was one of the articles I read, and then I read it again somewhere else. But the idea is that 2008-2009 financial crisis launched the era of the CFO. This pandemic and the civil unrest and, frankly, the political divide that started to happen, really like a black line chasm between political views through the election, I think has created the era of the CHRO. This is our time to step up and help build the culture, the leadership capabilities at the top of the house all the way through future-proof the company for any other major types of hits like this, because things are going to happen in the world. We are going to face these types of things, and it's built some new muscles for CHROs, but it's also brought us, you're going to see an explosion of CHROs on the board. I absolutely believe the CHRO is going to become a regular board member now.
Now, with the exception of you and the people that have contributed to the book and the people that you and I have worked with, the other CHROs that I've been exposed to, and we will never name names, but it's always been my general feeling that because of their status, whether it's compensation or otherwise, that they've deferred to the other C-suite members. And now we're in this moment where that situation is now completely reversing, where nobody else can do anything without the consult, without the wisdom, without the advice of the CHRO. And do you think, to your point about needing key leaders, is the bulk of the people leading HR, are we ready for that role? Have we been telling the right story? Have we been preparing ourselves? Have we become the leaders that we were supposed to be to meet this moment? Or are we going to struggle for a while and we're now going to start expecting the same leadership qualities in a CHRO that we do in a CEO or a COO?
There's so many layers to that question. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on your own question, but let me give you a couple things that come to mind for me, George. And my previous role as the head of HR for Mitel, our CEO used to get myself and the CFO together, the three of us, once a month for an hour. And he called it the G3. And the G3 meeting was bringing the financials and the people together and talking about. And the beauty is, I built a cloud-based HRS capability, which had the single source of truth on workforce planning, on succession, on performance, on retention, attrition, demographics, the shape of our organization in terms of pay grades. And, this gets really important when you're a global technology organization. Are you a pyramid with, expanding appropriate spans, or are you what we were at one point, a fat diamond, where you got a lot of blockers in the middle, right? The fat diamond will kill your company. That ability to talk about workforce planning and be the single source of truth about the human capital side to our CFO was invaluable to him. And what was invaluable to me was to sit and talk about the drivers of our P&L in our various product lines, in our various countries, in our regions, and the interplay between the cost of the cost of development, the cost of sales, and how that trickled down to our ultimate EBITDA goal, where I could then think about ways my organization, HR, could work. We called simplify programs, process improvement, Kaizen, ways to pull out waste out of the system. And some of that, George, was a talent move, and some of that was a process improvement move, right? If we saw someone was leading poorly or not driving sales appropriately, it wasn't a process issue, it was a people issue. I think we are ready to be in that discussion, leading that discussion, and having our peers at the C-suite defer to us. And we earn that through, the ability to tie the workforce to the business plan, the talent plan to the business plan, the performance measures of learning and development, and the outputs of doing really good leadership and learning programs, and what those metrics would be. I'm talking about secretly. I'm talking about nerdy stuff like Kirkpatrick's 5 levels of learning, but that work over the past 20 years and building that into our toolkit, and then connecting that with the CEO and CFO so that the three of us are aligned in terms of driving the business, to me has empowered and emboldened the CHRO to be a business leader, and in some ways, for some of them, to be successors on the CEO chart.
I think if we were to label a call to action on this episode, I think you called it out. And that is, if you're a small business, if you're a big business, the CFO, the CEO, and the CHRO should have that huddle meeting and bring the financials and the people issues together. So if you're listening to this podcast and you want a brilliant idea of something that can make an immediate impact, pulling things together, your CFO, your CHRO, your CEO in a room once a week, you figure out the time. But I think that's a great call out, Tom, because, when I was thinking through the question that I posed to you, I saw too many CHROs acting with, deferring or demure to their other C-suite executives. And in my brain, in a company, the only people that can veto things are the CEO, the CFO, the CHRO, or the chief legal officer. Hey, it's illegal. The CHRO is, it would be wrong for the people who are unethical. And the CFO is, we can't afford to do it. And the CEO is just, hey, that's a dumb idea. That's not in line with our vision. But those 4 people, or at least the trifecta that you named, don't get together as often as they should. And it's been one of those things that's always frustrated me. And it was the joy of coming to work with you, is that I didn't see you as an HR leader. I saw you as a leader. And I think, that call to action, us being strategic and the CHRO position elevating itself, it involves them telling a different story. The value proposition of the CHRO, I don't think is told by very many people, or, from top to bottom, all the way down to an HR business partner. I don't think we tell the story of the value of HR and the examples we just talked about today. The declining labor pool, the leadership issues, which we are really going to tackle in the next one. If you were to tell C-suite executives or small business leaders what the value, I'm really putting you on the spot, making a tough question, but what would you tell them is the critical reason for having HR be the table around all the issues that come up?
Well, I think some ways our experience of CHROs, because we've only been in so many jobs, George, is probably narrow to the actual population of CHROs, business people, who are highly connected to the business and highly connected to the CEO, the CFO, and driving the business forward. I think of Donna Morris, who's the chief people officer now at Walmart, but 17 years at Adobe. And one of the things I really admired about her role at Adobe, because Walmart's a whole different animal. I can't even imagine the pressure. That's more of a political position. And I say that not to disparage her. I interviewed for the head of management development at Walmart. I interviewed with the previous chief people officer. Her job wasn't running HR for Walmart. Her job was Washington, D.C. You're an ambassador and a lobbyist versus, now that's changed as their company has changed. And Donna's a much more active head of HR in terms of all things talent. But at Adobe, she was the head of employee and customer experience. She was the head of EX and CX, not EX and then marketing had CX. She had both. And I saw that about 4 years ago while I was at Mitel, and I approached our CEO and said, hey, look, I sit in these operations reviews. I hear us talk about our channel partners. These are the people that would sell our products and software into customers because a lot of technology is sold through a channel, not necessarily direct customers, although we did sell direct. I said, we have multi-million-dollar channel partners, and each of the members of the C-suite sponsor like an East Coast, West Coast, North, South channel partner except me. What's going on here? Do you not think I could bring value to helping a channel partner figure out how best to move from the premise to the cloud, best to position our products and our solutions into their marketplace, and could also listen to their needs about what we as a company could do to help them maintain market share and drive Mitel to the top of their preferred vendor list, because they could have gone with Polycom or ShoreTel at the time before we bought them. And so they said, absolutely, sure. And so, my last 2 years or 3 years at Mitel, I was the executive sponsor for 2 channel partners. Every quarter, I had a 2-hour call with the sales rep that represented us to them and those channel partners talking about their business. And invariably, George, they asked me about talent and staffing and diversity, and they got free leadership development coaching, which I was totally happy to do. But it gave me an insight to the outside of where our business lives, the outside of what a lot of people think is outside of HR, and it's actually the beginning of HR. And so the answer to your question is the people who are ready to position HR as the table, talent as the table, have drawn a line from their customer and what the company does to make money and satisfy and delight customers into their people practices and said, there's none of this we can do. Software, manufacturing, services, outsourcing, you name the pharmaceuticals, consumer goods, fast casual, retail. There isn't a CHRO in those top companies of those industries, the Nordstroms, the McDonalds, the Walmarts, the J&Js, my former boss, Peter Fasolo there, who haven't drawn that line from their customer in and then architected their people and talent strategies to deliver against that business model, that very crystal clear customer outcome that the company has to produce through its people. So everyone who's done that, they've made their jobs easier, and yet they've made them harder because the metrics are much more clear for HR. My metrics are much more clear. We get measured at my current company on patient satisfaction, on safety, on quality. 3 things. If I don't have great people on the shop floor in those hospitals, those numbers go down. So I know I have to deliver talent value from the HR table all the way out to our customer, our patients.
So I'm going to continue because I'm having fun throwing hard questions at you because I have a captive audience in my co-host. You know the old argument, chicken or egg?
I'll take difficult HR questions for 1,000, George.
All right. You've got the daily double today, Tom. Congratulations. And your question is, following the chicken and egg discussion, following the our leaders made or born, those leaders that you talk about in HR, do you think it was because they had the right business mindset that prioritized talent, or do you think it was the force of personality and the intellectual horsepower that those leaders brought to the table that forced that mindset on the company, or forced not mindset, but that brought that practice of intertwining those things? So was that the company and they got the right leader, or is it the leader that's changing the company? Hopefully you didn't wager everything in the pot on this answer, Tom.
Yeah, you might have missed that. I did. I bet it all. I really believe that leader, through their intellectual horsepower, their prior experiences, the thing that, to me, great HR leaders, the Randy McDonald's, the former head of HR of IBM, Donna Morris, Peter Fasolo, former colleague at Bristol Myers who went on to become the head of HR for Amgen, Stuart Tross, Patty McCord of Netflix, George, Tracy Keogh of HP. They had both the intellectual horsepower and the right experiences for sure to be in those jobs. What I think sets them apart is they're constantly scanning the horizon and reading the organization, the business, the market, and pulling that all together, integrating it. They're never not learning while they're delivering services and solutions via the HR function. And I think they do more to shape the organization than the organization shaping them. Sure, there's a certain amount of growth that happens because I just said they're constantly scanning, which means they're continuous learners for themselves. I know Tracy Keogh, when she left the consulting firm, George, not Aon, but who was she with? Well, it was owned by Aon, right? She came to us. She was the head of HR for a services company embedded in a larger company to become the head of HR for HP. That's a step function. That's a risky move in terms of her experience to then, take on this behemoth and then take on Meg Whitman, who was clearly the best leader HP had in a while.
She told me the story of how she baited Meg into competing for the job. We'll have to cover that on a podcast, but as part of our interview for the book, she actually told me the story that she literally strategized on how to bait her into taking the role because
Meg was on the board.
Yeah, exactly. So, I know that we're probably getting up on time for episode number 2. We did come full circle in the right way, kind of what I hope to, which is to talk about what great HR leaders are. But if you were to coach and advise business leaders about what they should expect out of their HR leaders, what would you say that they should be looking for to get the right person to propel their company forward?
I think first and foremost is they have got to be looking for someone who's curious about the business. The HR pedigree probably reads on the resume, and you're probably not hiring a first-time HR person. You might be hiring a first-time CHRO. I had to have my first shot. Someone took a shot on me. But the thing that I find matters the most to delivering the right approaches, solution, service, whatever you want to call them, the right HR strategy with the practical and pragmatic action plans to follow is an HR person who has a curiosity for the business, an absolute thirst to understand how does our business model work, who are our customers, how do we make money, how does the product or service get built and delivered to the customer. Every element of the P&L can walk backwards in one page, the 10K, before they set out, their journey for, changing the human capital function. At the same time, they should be looking for a leader that has enough pragmatic sense to pick off the low-hanging fruit, right? Every company has broken things. Every company has problems. I haven't been in an HR role where I didn't find some easy things to pick off. Or, unfortunately, they seemed easy, but they kept breaking because it couldn't get the stability of that process, whether it's performance, it's usually staffing. Yeah. Finding good. I told my current guy, I said, you're staffing until I tell you you're talent acquisition. But right now you're staffing. And I think you know what that means, George, is I need him to elevate and elevate his team before he gets the right to play the higher strategic role and pull all the levers. But right now we got to fill jobs. And so I think a business leader who's hiring a head of HR should look for someone who's got a thirst and desire to understand the business and then can be pragmatic enough in the short term to deliver solutions. I love, I hope it's okay we quote some of I love that Gartner, 9 defining moments of a new CHRO, that paper. You can find it online. That's one of their 9 defining moments is quick wins. And I found it to be true because we did not have a recruiting function here to start with. I just had a guy over staffing who was sort of toggling resources in from outside, having it being done in the field, but no one with a real accountability to be a recruiter. So you know what I did in week 1, George? I hired another recruiter. We had one, she was doing part-time. Now we've unleashed those 2 recruiters on the areas of hospital staffing that we were trying to address in the field, and she's starting to fill jobs. Lo and behold, someone dialing for smiles will get people to show up to the door and fill a job. Now, there's all the other things we have to do, but, I think that's a quick win that I'm going to have to continue to, play with. This isn't the only fix, but you got to look at your situation and say, well, geez, I can't expect gold when I am mining in topsoil. I've got to go where the rock is and break some rock before I can expect to make gold. Did that analogy hold together?
I think it holds together pretty well. As we continue to evolve the podcast, it's going to be great when we bring on some of these guests that you and I have been talking about to talk about the complexity and the leadership and all the things that are necessary to excel in what I think is, arguably one of the most difficult roles of a lifetime is that lead HR position. And I'm not going to say whether one's easier than the CFO or the COO. We're not going down that path. But right now, I think you've said it right, this is the year of the CHRO. This is the year of HR that's making a difference, whether it's finding and filling roles or dealing with the escaping the pandemic. How do we get back to work? What portion stays remote? How do we figure out compensation across? Because now people that were earning a California wage are now moving to Texas and Florida, knowing they're earning a California wage and they no longer have to pay state taxes. So how's that going to change, the financial dynamic?
Wait till they see the property tax in Texas.
Exactly. But for me, what we just talked about today was really, it started clicking for me early on. And what we talked about the last podcast is that I think that this is just a great place for strong leaders, for curious leaders, people that are interested in business. And if you have that curiosity and that interest in business, you should be looking at a career in HR. As a matter of fact, when we talked to Tracy Keogh, she was a business leader first, and she was talking about how HR was broken, and the CEO said, well, you've got the job. And so she was voluntold that that was her next best role. But I think there's a lot that we should have expected of our leaders, and I think it cues us up really well, because the next episode before we get to guests is we're going to talk about HR driving a culture of leadership and the criticality of that HR person, the CHRO, the VP, the SVP, the EVP, whatever the title is, that first and foremost, it's about leadership, and it's about talented leadership and driving that human equation. So you're right. It's the year of the CHRO.
The era of the CHRO.
The era, yeah.
I'm hoping that I'll get to run the board and ask you the Jeopardy questions this next time around.
I think we might do that, but we have to check with our studio manager, Nayara, to make sure that we can do that on the next episode. So we will check with her. But for all you talent warriors out there, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. This is a great function. It's got its highs, its lows. As I've said in previous times, if I did a 23andMe, I'd find a strong masochistic gene to make sure that that's the reason that I was in HR. But Tom, any parting thoughts for us before we close out for today?
No, go out there and get that talent.
Hey, talent warriors, talent makes all the difference. It's the one true competitive advantage that you can hope to achieve and maintain. We appreciate you very much listening to the podcast, and we hope to catch you on episode number 3 coming up very, very soon. Thank you, and do great. And thank you for listening to the Talent War podcast, where we discuss all things talent, focusing on having a true talent mindset, which is the core belief the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain is your talent. Join us for the next episode of the Talent War podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts. If you like what you heard, subscribe, and please leave us a kind review. Do connect with Mr. Dr. Tom Lokar and myself, George Randle, on the Talent War Group's LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram account. And by all means, send your comments, inquiries, and any ideas for controversial talent, HR-related topics to media@talentwargroup.com. The Talent War podcast is brought to you by the Talent War Group, an executive search and advisory firm with services like talent acquisition, leadership development, seminars, executive coaching. Basically, we work with you to bring talent solutions to business problems. And to get started, visit us at talentwargroup.com.